You won't believe what happened when I got a letter from the HOA. It wasn't a welcome packet or an invitation to a community barbecue. It was a fine notice. A $500 fine. All because I was feeding my horses. Yeah, you heard that right. It all started on a bright Tuesday morning. I was in the barn, tossing hay to my 2 horses. Charlie and Daisy. As usual, I didn't think twice about it. They've been with me for years, and feeding them is part of my routine. The grass in my pasture had gotten sparse, so I've been supplementing their diet with hay. It's no different than feeding a dog, right? Well, apparently, in my suburban neighborhood, it's a huge problem. I live in a nice little cul-de-sac where the homes are all well kept. But the HOA, let's just say they love to micromanage. From how tall your grass can grow to how many cars you can park in your driveway, they've got a rule for everything. So when I got that letter, I assumed it was just a mistake. But no, it turns out I was violating a non-compliant livestock feeding policy. What's that? No clue. Never heard of it before, and they never told me about it. I'm not the kind of person to back down easily, so I called the HOA office. The woman on the other end was cold, distant, no real explanation. Just, you're in violation of the rules. When I asked where it was, written that feeding horses was against the rules, she told me, and I quote, "You should have read the fine print when you moved in." Fine print? I never signed anything about not feeding my own animals, so I did what any fed-up person would do. I grabbed my boots, hopped in my tractor, and made my way to her front yard, the HOA president's yard. I had a point to prove, and I wasn't going to let her get away with this. The look on her face when she saw me rolling up with my tractor, pulling onto her meticulously manicured lawn, was priceless. And you better believe it wasn't just my horses I was feeding. I had a point to make, but it wasn't just about feeding animals, was it? It was about standing up to a system that thought they could control everything in my life. As I parked the tractor right in the middle of her pristine lawn, I could practically feel her blood pressure rise. HOA Karen, as we called her, was out there within seconds, flustered and livid. Her perfectly styled hair bounced as she stormed down the front steps, in her high heels, like a woman on a mission to assert her dominance. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" she snapped, her arms crossed in front of her chest. I turned off the engine, stepped out of the tractor, and wiped my hands on my jeans, trying to keep my cool. Just feeding my horses. Seems I'm not allowed to do that without getting fined. Her face twisted into a mix of confusion and anger, clearly not expecting any pushback. "This is my property, and you're violating HOA regulations. You need to move that tractor off my lawn right now." I chuckled, keeping my voice steady. I'd move it? But then I'd be leaving your precious rules behind, wouldn't I? And you know what? I think it's time someone else around here starts breaking a few. For a moment, there was a tense silence. She wasn't sure how to respond. Maybe she thought I was bluffing, or maybe she just wasn't used to someone challenging her. But she wasn't backing down either. "This is a violation," she snapped again, louder this time, trying to muster authority. "You're going to pay for this, do you hear me?" I didn't flinch. "I've already received your fine, and I'll pay it, right after. You send me an actual piece of paper, explaining what this so-called livestock feeding policy even is. I'm still waiting on that." Her face flushed. She went from furious to flustered, not knowing what to do with herself. You could tell she was trying to gather her thoughts, but whatever grand threat she'd had planned had evaporated. "You're making a mockery of the whole neighborhood," she spat, pointing her finger at me. "People like you don't belong here." I raised an eyebrow and gave her a grin. "It's funny. I thought this was my neighborhood too. I guess we both learned something today, huh?" Just as she opened her mouth to retort, a few neighbors had started peeking out their windows. I could see them gathered at the curb, watching the showdown unfold. Karen turned toward them, but before she could make a scene, I put my foot down. "I'll be here all day," I said, leaning against the tractor. "No hurry. Take your time to call the HOA. Just know, I'm not leaving until this gets sorted." At that moment, I realized I wasn't just fighting her anymore. This wasn't just about me and my horses. It was about taking a stand for everyone who's ever felt like they're being bossed around by some overzealous authority, and I was just getting started. As I sat on the edge of my tractor, arms crossed and waiting for her to come up with some kind of solution, something unexpected happened. The neighbors, who had been quietly watching from their windows, started coming outside one by one. It wasn't just the usual folks either. These were the ones who'd always stayed silent, never speaking up when Karen pulled one of her power plays. First came Mrs. Walters from 2 doors down. She was the older woman who always kept to herself, but today, she walked right up to Karen and put a hand on her shoulder. "Patricia," she said softly, "maybe it's time to rethink this. Jack's been here for years, and he's always been good about his animals." Karen stiffened at the mention of my name. She hated the idea that I had allies. But Mrs. Walters wasn't backing down. She turned to me and gave a small nod. He's a good neighbor. And I don't think anyone here has a problem with how he cares for his horses. I could see Karen's face turning red, her nostrils flaring. This wasn't the way she expected the day to go. In her world, the HOA president was supposed to be feared, respected, even worshipped. But now, in front of a crowd of neighbors, she wasn't the all-powerful dictator she thought she was. She was just a woman in a power struggle that she wasn't winning. Then, almost as if on cue, Derek from across the street stepped out of his house, his tall frame looming as he adjusted his sunglasses. He was the kind of guy who'd always played the role of the quiet rebel. Everyone knew he didn't care much for rules, especially the ones that made no sense. "Patricia," Derek said, his voice low but filled with that undeniable confidence of someone who knew the rules were on his side. "Is there really a policy about feeding horses in the neighborhood? 'Cause from what I can tell, that's some serious overreach." Karen tried to stammer out a response, but Derek wasn't having it. "I mean, if that's true, we should probably ban all the people with garden gnomes too, right? Or the bird feeders?" That got a chuckle from a few of the other neighbors. They were warming up to the idea of standing with me against Karen's nonsense. By now I could feel the tide turning. People were looking at her with growing doubt in their eyes. The same people who had once nodded, along when she barked out orders, were now questioning her. The power she wielded over this neighborhood was starting to crack. Karen tried to regain control, but her voice shook. "This is not up for debate! I will be filing a report." "Yeah, sure," I interrupted. "Go ahead. But before you do that, can you explain why I haven't seen one single person in this neighborhood receive a fine for feeding their animals? Or are you just picking on me because I'm the one who has the guts to call you out?" That hit her hard. There was no reply. For the first time that day, Karen had nothing to say. The crowd of neighbors had made their choice, and it wasn't hers. I gave one final glance around the group, all eyes on her, before I cranked the tractor back up and slowly started to drive off her lawn. But I wasn't done yet. Oh no, I wasn't leaving without one last message. "See you at the next HOA meeting." "Patricia," I said with a grin, then drove away, leaving her fuming in the middle of her own front yard. The next few days were a whirlwind. My phone was ringing off the hook, and the neighborhood gossip train was in full motion. People were texting me, sending messages, even stopping by to talk about what had happened. I didn't realize how many people had been fed up with Karen's constant control over their lives until that moment. She was always the one making people feel small, and I had just broken the dam open. But I knew this wasn't over. Karen didn't just let things slide. She was already plotting her next move. The HOA board meeting was set for that Thursday evening, and you bet she wasn't going to let this slide. I'd been to plenty of these before, where Karen had her supporters, and things always went her way. But this time was different. People were talking. They were planning to show up. I walked into the community center that night with my head held high. The room was packed with residents, a mix of old faces and some new ones. And at the front of the room, there she was, Karen, sitting behind her little podium, the smug smile on her face that only the truly deluded can pull off. As I sat down in the back, I could feel the tension in the room. It was palpable. Everyone was here because they were tired of the way Karen had been running things, and they were ready to make a change. This wasn't about horses anymore. This was about standing up to someone who thought they could control us all. The meeting started with the usual pleasantries. Karen rattled off the standard agenda, but I could tell she was nervous. Her voice was a little shaky, and her eyes kept darting around, trying to read the room. But I wasn't about to let her control the narrative. When it was finally my turn to speak, I stood up slowly, making sure everyone knew I was about to have my say. I could feel all eyes on me as I walked to the front. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice loud enough to carry through the room. "I'm here tonight to talk about something that happened a few days ago. I got a fine from the HOA for feeding my horses. And while I'm sure the fine was meant to scare me into submission, it did something else instead. It made me realize just how far some people are willing to go to control others." Karen's face turned red, but she didn't say a word. "I'm not here to fight against the HOA, but I am here to fight against the way it's been run. No one should be afraid of living in their own neighborhood, and no one should have to live in fear of being fined for something as simple as caring for their animals." I paused, letting my words sink in. The room was silent, but I could see the nods. People were with me. "The real issue here," I continued, "is not feeding my horses. The real issue is the abuse of power, and I'm not the only one who's been affected. It's time for a change, a real one." I could see Karen's face scrunching, her fists tightening at her sides. But she knew she was losing, slowly but surely. She was losing the support of the very people who had once backed her. "I'm asking all of you here tonight," I said, looking directly at the crowd, to stand with me. Let's make sure this doesn't happen again. Let's take back our neighborhood from people who think they have the right to control everything. The room erupted into applause, and just like that, Karen's reign was over. She didn't even get a chance to speak before the motion was put to a vote. The board members voted unanimously in favor of removing her from her position as president. As I walked out of the meeting, I couldn't help but feel a sense of triumph. I'd done more than just fight for my right to feed my horses. I'd fought for everyone who had ever been pushed around by someone like Karen. And in the end, we all won. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share it with someone who's ever had to deal with a crazy HOA. Your support helps me bring more real-life stories like this one.